So that's the meaning of bid'i. So it's important for us to get a grasp on that term, bid'i. The bid'i is someone who is uh not not have the same creed as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we mentioned briefly before about the judgment of the bid'i, who he is, and what his judgment is. So we said the bid'i is a label or a name for anyone who deviates from the creed of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from anyone who uh, opposes something that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came with in the creed. So, and the companions. So that bid'i, that heretic, that person who is a deviant, either he reaches to the level of blasphemy or he does not. So these are split up into two categories. They are um, sometimes, or most of the time, like we said before, most of the time, they reach the level of blasphemy. But there are certain uh, singular cases or some very specific cases where the heretic, the deviant, he doesn't reach to the level of blasphemy with uh, his deviance and with the way that he was deviated from the creed of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, when an example of the first category of the deviance that has reached to the level of blasphemy is like the one who believes that Allah is like us. And who is that? Who is the one that believes that Allah is like us? Like the Wahhabi, like the one who says, or like the one who says and believes that Allah is established on the throne, or settled on the throne, or sitting on the throne, or residing above the throne, or in the heavens, right? Those people, they are deviant. They have a creed that is different than the creed of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it reaches to the level of blasphemy. So that's an example of a deviance that reaches to the level of blasphemy. Another example is like the deviance of those who deny that Allah Ta'ala is the creator of everything. So these people are called Qadariyah. Mentioned them before. And like we said, there's going to be a lot of repetition because this subject, it requires that repetition so that the the information becomes settled in the heart. So these people are called Qadariyah. These people, they deny destiny. So these are examples of deviance, heresy that reaches to the level of blasphemy. This is an example of a bid'ah that reaches to the level of blasphemy. And so the second category is the bid'ah that does not reach the level of blasphemy, like the one who negates seeing Allah in the hereafter. Now, so I just, as you can see, um, for us, for the Muslim who he learned the obligatory knowledge, these are not foreign concepts. These are not new subjects or something that has not been discussed before. But basically, we know that the Muslim, amongst the the beliefs that the Muslim is obligated to believe in, is that we will, when the Muslims are in paradise, we will be able to see Allah Ta'ala. Allah Ta'ala will give the Muslims in paradise the ability to see him, unlike the creation is seen. So that's the creed of Ahlul Sunnah. Ahlul Sunnah, Ahlul Sunnah says that when the Muslims are in paradise, Allah Ta'ala will give the Muslims in paradise the ability to see him, unlike the creation is seen. So without a place, without a direction, without an image, without a shape, without a size, and it's something that we cannot imagine right now. But Allah Ta'ala will give us, will give the Muslim the ability to see him in paradise. So this is the creed of Ahlul Sunnah. This is what we have to believe. We have to believe that. And over there, right, because of a misunderstanding that they have, that they say, well, only things that are like us can be seen. That's their misunderstanding. They think um, that you can only see things that are in a direction, that you could only see things that are in a place. You could only see things that have a size and a shape and a color and an image. So because they think that those are the only things that we can see, so they say, well, Allah, He is not like us, and He exists without a place, and He is not attributed with a place or a direction. So that means that we won't see Him, right? So that's their thinking, that's their misunderstanding. So this is deviant. Yani it's not the creed of Ahlul Sunnah. It's not the creed of Ahlul Sunnah, but it doesn't reach to the level of blasphemy. Yani just that by itself, up to that point, it does not reach to the level of blasphemy. So, but it is called deviance, and it is called um, heresy, or you could call it in Arabic, it is called a bid'ah of the belief, but it doesn't reach to the level of blasphemy. And we're going to talk about those, we're going to talk specifically about those people in depth in future classes. So anyone who is not a Sunni Muslim, he is called a deviant, right? Understand that, know that, take that piece of information. Anyone who is not a Sunni is a deviant, is a heretic. So those people post those pictures on Facebook or whatever, on Instagram or any other social media platform, where they put the picture, they put they post and it says Sunni, Shia, Salafi, Sufi, and then at the bottom it says Muslim, and then it has an X on all those labels, and then at the bottom it says Muslim and have a green check mark. Yeah, those people are deviants. The ones whoever posted that is a deviant, because he's trying to say that it's all the same. He's trying to say Sunni, Shia, Salafi, Sufi, all these are the same, but they're not. They're not the same. So, and the Muslim, yani, in this specific technical context, is the Sunni Muslim. That's the Muslim. Of course, we said that those who don't have the same creed as the Sunni, as Ahlul Sunnah, that they're considered deviant, and that most of the time they're deviants. It does reach to the level of blasphemy, and there are those specific cases where they don't reach the level of blasphemy. That's true, but still, some scholars they generalized and they said anyone who opposes the creed of Ahlul Sunnah is a blasphemer. Yani that he is a deviant, meaning he's a blasphemer. So I'm just saying that so that you know, so that you're not surprised if you ever see, let's say, in the books of the scholars that they judge anyone who is not a Sunni Muslim as a kafir. Don't be surprised by that, because most of the time that is the case. So what do these deviants try to do? They try to associate themselves to Ahlul Sunnah. So they all try to say about themselves that they're Sunni. So the Shia, we talked about them before, and of course nowadays many people are asking about them, and they have a lot of social media platforms now where they try to normalize and make Shiism as something that is normal, but it's not. And we're going to talk about them in depth, but for now we'll say that whoever believes the actual creed of the Shia, whoever believes their actual creed, they are a kafir, because it is part of their creed that they believe that the companions as a whole, that they betrayed, right? They believe that the companions as a whole, that um that they cheated and they betrayed and that they changed the Quran and that they did a lot of vile things, and they accused Lady Aisha of fornicating, and they hate her. So that's part of their creed. Now you might tell me, oh, this person, they don't believe that, but they call themselves a Shi'i. So we'll say if a person, they think that being a Shi'i just means loving the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then we don't judge that person as a kafir just that. Of course, they're ignorant of what a Shia is, but if they call themselves that because they think that's that just means loving the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we don't judge them as a kafir just for that. But of course, they're misguided. Yani they're not on the right track. So we read a hadith last time. The terms of it are وَإِنَّهُ سَيَخْرُجُ مِنْ أُمَّتِي أَقْوَامٌ تَجَارَى بِهِمْ تِلْكَ الْأَهْوَاء كما يتجارى الكلب لصاحبه لا يبقى منه عرق ولا مفصل إلا دخله. So this hadith means that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling us that there will come a people from that identify as Muslims, that they call themselves Muslims, that deviance has penetrated them, and it has spread throughout their bodies, just as the sickness of al-kalab spreads through the body of its victims. So there's a certain disease known in Arabic as al-kalab, and this disease basically is spread throughout the whole body. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is making that comparison to the situation of the one who has a deviance in the creed. That person's deviance, it spreads throughout, and it starts in the heart, and it basically spreads through every aspect of that person's existence. Meaning that the person who has a deviance in the creed, usually it's terminal. They don't usually uh, get cured from it because it's ingrained in them. It's something that they don't back down from it, and they double down on it. So, but it does happen where someone who is a deviant, uh, they would be guided. Allah Ta'ala guides them, and so once they hear the evidence, once they hear the proof, they would change from being deviant to being a Sunni. So that does happen, but it's not often that happens. Usually, when someone is deviant in the creed, they don't get cured from it. So, like we said, the deviance is either blasphemous or other than blasphemy. And so, how do we judge then if this deviance reached the level of blasphemy? If you remember when we did those important rules, when we mentioned that the one who contradicts the core meaning of the two testifications of faith, that person is judged as a kafir, whether he was a new Muslim or whether he was ignorant or whatever his case was, if the thing that he contradicted or denied, or the thing that he was mistaken about, if it's related to the core meaning of the two testifications of faith, that person has no excuse and they are not judged as a Muslim because they have failed to fulfill the minimum requirement to be judged as a Muslim. So if the person has a deviance in the creed that is of that same category, of the category where they um, contradict something that is related to the core meaning of the two shahadas, of the two testifications of faith, then that is a blasphemous deviance. Then that is the type of deviance that they're judged as a kafir for that. So when we say the core meaning of the two shahadas, what does that mean? It means related to the 13 attributes that every accountable Muslim is obligated to know, and what's related to attributing to the prophets something that does not befit them, like attributing to the prophets lying or attributing to them that they committed an enormous sin or that they blasphemed. Those are the things that no one is excused from. And that's what we mean when we say related to the core meaning of the two testifications of faith. So that is the definition of that. So if the person's deviance is like that, related to that, then it is a blasphemous deviance. And if it is not related to that, and if it's something that is not related to the core meanings of the two shahadas, and it's not related to something that they are, let's say, denying or contradicting, something that's known in the religion by necessity, then that type of deviance, we say that person, his deviance did not reach to the level of blasphemy, just like we mentioned, like the ones who deny seeing Allah in the hereafter. So those people, like we said, they had the misunderstanding. They thought that the only thing that can be seen is something that's in a place and something that has a size and a shape and a direction. So they said Allah is not in a place. Allah does not have a shape or an image or a direction. Therefore, he cannot be seen. So we say those people, because they had that misunderstanding, they don't blaspheme, but they are judged as deviant because the creed of Ahlul Sunnah is that Allah Ta'ala will grant the Muslims the ability to see Him in the hereafter, uh, unlike the creation is seen. And so, like we mentioned before, that not every misunderstanding or every, let's say, misinterpretation, not every type of misunderstanding or misinterpretation saves the person from being judged as a kafir. So there's some misunderstandings and misinterpretations that would make the person be judged as a kafir regardless of that misinterpretation. What's an example of that we mentioned before? Like the one who thinks that Allah is a light because he, let's say, because he knows that one of the names of Allah is An-Nur. And so he thought that An-Nur means the light. So he thought that Allah is a light. So even though that's a misinterpretation, even though that's a misunderstanding, um, he's still judged as a kafir for that. Why is that? Because he has attributed to Allah that which does not befit him, and that is something that's related to the core meaning of the two shahadas. So he's not excused. Another important point to know about this hadith that we mentioned about the 73 groups, the Prophet ﷺ explicitly mentioned in that hadith that all of them would be in hellfire except for one. So what does that tell us? That tells us that whoever is not a Sunni Muslim, that he will be in hellfire. And that person that is not a Sunni Muslim, he will either be in hellfire forever because of the fact that his deviance reached to the level of blasphemy. So he'll be in hellfire forever because he has a blasphemous creed, or he'll be in hellfire because he is a deviant in the creed, but it didn't reach to the level of blasphemy. But the difference here is that since his deviance was in the level of the creed, that means that he is not like the Sunni Muslim who is an enormous sinner, and therefore he'll either be forgiven and he won't go to hell, and he'll go to paradise instead of going to hell. Because as you know, the Sunni Muslim, let's say if he drinks alcohol or if he, let's say, doesn't fast Ramadan, that Sunni Muslim, he has committed an enormous sin. So if he dies without repenting, then his situation, we say, is under the will of Allah. So um, if Allah willed for him to be punished in hellfire, he is going to be punished in hellfire for that sin that he did. And if um, he did not, and if Allah did not will for that Sunni Muslim enormous sinner to be punished for his sin, then uh, he will not go to hellfire. So that situation of possibly being forgiven and not being punished, that is only for the Sunni Muslim enormous sinner. As for the deviant in the creed that did not reach to the level of blasphemy, he is judged as an enormous sinner, but because his enormous sin is due to a deviance in the creed, he does not have that same judgment as the Sunni Muslim who's an enormous sinner. Meaning that the one who has a deviance in the creed and that deviance did not reach to the level of blasphemy, that person, he is an enormous sinner, and he won't have that, let's say, chance to be forgiven and not go to hellfire. So he will go to hellfire, but of course he won't stay in hellfire forever because of the fact that he is still judged as a Muslim. So that's one important benefit that we gain from understanding the difference between an enormous sinner in the creed and an enormous sinner that is not in the creed, but instead in of the acts of worship. So to summarize the case, the Sunni Muslim, he has the correct creed, but let's say he drinks alcohol, or let's say he fornicates, and he dies without repenting. So we say the judgment of that Sunni Muslim enormous sinner is that either Allah will forgive him and he won't go to hell and he'll go straight to paradise, or he'll be punished in hellfire for his sins and then he'll be taken out. That's for the Sunni Muslim. For the one who is a deviant in the creed, but his deviance did not reach to the level of exiting from Islam, we say this person is a Muslim enormous sinner, but because he's an enormous sinner in the creed, he will surely go to hellfire. So he won't, let's say, be forgiven and go to paradise. Rather, he will enter hellfire. But still, since he died as a Muslim, since he's still judged as a Muslim, he will eventually be taken out. So that's the difference between the Sunni Muslim enormous sinner and the one is um, who is a deviant in the creed that did not reach the level of blasphemy. He's an enormous sinner, but he will go to hell. He won't be forgiven. There's a question here. It says, "Are Wahhabis kafirs?" Yes, the answer is yes. We've said it many times because the Wahhabi believes that Allah has organs. The Wahhabi believes that Allah is in the direction of above. The Wahhabi believes that Allah um, physically goes up and down every last third of the night. The Wahhabi believes that Allah has a foot and that He will put it in hellfire. The Wahhabi believes that Allah has fingers. The Wahhabi believes all types of non-befitting things that they say about Allah. So for sure, the Wahhabi is a kafir. And also on top of that, the Wahhabi believes that every Muslim that is, they believe anyone who's not a Wahhabi is a kafir. So that by them judging the Sunni Muslims as kafirs, they themselves become kafirs. So there's many different reasons why the Wahhabis are judged as kafirs. So we just mentioned some of them. The main reason is because they believe that Allah is sitting on the throne or established on the throne or rising above the throne. They believe that Allah is in the direction of above. They believe that Allah is way up high, up there, above the throne. And that is blasphemy, of course, because um, attributing a place or a direction to Allah is non-befitting. Yani, it is insulting Allah to say that Allah is in a direction, to say that Allah is in a place, to say that Allah is to say that Allah has organs. All of that is blasphemy. Even if the Wahhabis, they say, but we don't know how and we can't imagine it. Even if they say, in a way that befits His Majesty, because that is contradictory, of course. Imagine if someone said, Allah is a creation in a way that befits His Majesty. Does it work? No, it doesn't work. Imagine if someone said, Allah is weak, but not like the weak people. This doesn't work. Imagine if someone said, Allah is ignorant, but not like us. It doesn't work because those things, ignorance and weakness and being a creation, those things on their own are non-befitting to attribute to Allah. So the Wahhabis, they try to say Allah is above the throne or residing above the throne or established on the throne in a way that befits His Majesty. And they think that that saves them from being judged as kafirs, but it doesn't. Rather, it makes it any more emphasized that they're judged as kafirs because they have attributed to Allah what does not befit Him. And even if they claim that it says this or that in the Quran, we respond with whatever you quote from the Quran, whatever you quote from the Hadith, it doesn't have the meaning that you misinterpreted or misunderstood, and you thought that it meant that Allah is established on the throne or in the direction of above. And the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah, they have documented this information, they have documented the meanings of those verses and the meanings of those hadith in their books explicitly, and they have warned against Wahhabis as a whole, of course. So this type of rhetoric, like what we're talking about right now, like how we are explaining the creed of Ahlul Sunnah, and we're giving the proof and we mentioned the hadith, and we mentioned the verses of the Quran. This is called in Arabic al-kalam, and you can translate that to English as um, the rhetoric or the talk or the theological rhetoric. So that's called al-kalam in Arabic. Now, the kalam, yani the rhetoric of us, of Ahlus Sunnah, is praise. So when we mention a verse from the Quran and we mention a hadith to prove our creed, to prove that Islam is true, to prove that everything other than Islam is incorrect, to prove that Allah Ta'ala is the only one who deserves to be worshipped. This is good kalam. This is good talk. This is good rhetoric. So when we put together, let's say, a strong argument or a strong proof or strong evidence for the truth, yani for what is good and what is true, then this is good rhetoric. But if someone they put together an argument that is for deviance and for falsehood, then this is bad rhetoric. This is bad kalam. So the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah, has been documented from them that they have uh, dispraised and disparaged and discouraged the bad rhetoric, the bad kalam. So this is called kalam al-mubtadi'ah, the kalam of the heretics, the speech of the heretics. So the speech of the heretics, it has been dispraised. And of course it's dispraised because it is a speech that is used to spread falsehood. So whenever the scholars they talked about this bad speech and they said whoever deals in that bad rhetoric, then they are misguided and they are wasting their time, and this is something that people shouldn't involve themselves in, then that is correct, because they're basically saying no one should uh, get involved in the type of talk that is arguing for falsehood, that is trying to spread falsehood. So the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah, when they dispraise kalam, when they dispraise that rhetoric, they're dispraising the rhetoric of the deviants, not the rhetoric of Ahlul Sunnah. So what do the deviants, like the Wahhabis, when you tell them, because it's easy to refute a Wahhabi, you can refute a Wahhabi with one sentence. So because the Wahhabi believes that God is established on the throne, that Allah is rising above the throne, that Allah is sitting on the throne, that Allah is hovering above the throne. They have these different beliefs amongst them. And so when you tell them, right, to corner them, to silence them, to refute them, because when you have the knowledge, then you could easily silence the opponent with rhetoric, yani with words that they can't find a way out of it. So this is called ilzam in Arabic. Ilzam. It means you made a statement that they have to agree that it's true, and by them agreeing that it's true, they would have to, for example, judge themselves that they are wrong. So the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah, they are well versed in that type of rhetoric. So, for example, what did the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah they said? They said to refute a Wahhabi is very easy. So, a Sunni scholar would say to a Wahhabi, um, they would say to the Wahhabi, doesn't the throne have a beginning? Isn't it the case that the throne has a beginning? Right? It's a very simple question, very easy, very straightforward. And even an elementary school Muslim is able to answer this question. But when you ask it to a Wahhabi, it seems, right, it appears as if they have been possessed. Their face begins to contort, and it seems as if their body begins to shake and have a seizure. It seems like uh somehow ants have crawled inside of their pants, and they squirm and they wiggle and they writhe and they do everything except answer your question. So they'll tell you, who talks like that? Who asked that question amongst the companions? Where in the Quran is this question? Where in the Hadith is this question? This is the rhetoric. This is the kalam that we've been warned against speaking. This is the talk of the philosophers. That's what the Wahhabi responds with. And it's a very simple question. Isn't it the case that the throne, the Arsh, has a beginning? Because it's a rhetorical question in the sense that it's not asking like to discover whether the throne has a beginning or not. It's asking so that Wahhabi, he has to say yes. He cannot say the throne doesn't have a beginning. He has to say that the throne has a beginning. But he doesn't want to say. He doesn't want to answer it. He doesn't want to give the answer. Why? Because it puts him in a corner. Because it silences him. Because if he says the throne has a beginning, then you say, well, since the throne has a beginning, Allah is the only one without a beginning. Allah exists without a beginning. So here now you see how they are checkmated. Here you see how they are cornered, because they have to admit that before the throne existed, before the heavens existed, before the direction of above existed, Allah existed without it. So you see, this is the sword of Ahlul Sunnah, the metaphorical sword of Ahlul Sunnah, the rhetoric of truth, and the rhetoric of the saved group. This is the sword that always cuts, and it can never be broken or defeated. So if the Wahhabi answers yes, if he says the throne has a beginning, yes, then the Muslim, the Sunni, he says, and Allah is the only one without a beginning. And so before Allah created the throne, he existed without it. And after he created it, his existence did not change. So that's when the Wahhabi, he blows up and he loses his composure and he says, that's the talk of the Greek philosophers, and who among the companions said this, and where in the Quran is this mentioned, and where in the Hadith is this mentioned, etc. And we say, this is not the talk of the philosophers. This is not something that is bad to say. Rather, this is the of Ahlul Sunnah. What does that mean? It means that this is how the scholars, how they presented this rational argument to prove the truth, to establish the truth, to confirm that Allah exists without a place. But like we said, like we mentioned in the hadith earlier, that the deviant person, the deviant spreads throughout their whole body like a disease. So they are very reluctant to um, to retract their deviance. They're very reluctant to um, uh, change their wrong position, change their wrong position to the correct position. They're instead, what will they do? They'll double down on deviance, and they will come up with another um they'll come up with another fallacy. So they'll go from deviance to deviance, and they will refuse to acknowledge the truth, and they will insist on keeping their stance. So the meaning of the statement of الشافعي لأن يلقى الله العبد بكل ذنب ما عدا الشرك خير له من أن يلقاه بشيء من الأهواء. A Shafi'i statement, it means for the slave to die with every sin except shirk and except blasphemy is better for him than to die with deviance, is referring to the talk and the opinions of the heretics. It is not referring to the rhetoric of Ahlus Sunnah that is used to verify the truth, right? What we call the kalam, the rhetoric. So, what is the meaning of a Shafi'i statement? He's basically warning against deviance. He's not saying if you use rhetoric to prove the creed of Ahlus Sunnah that's bad. No, he's not saying that. He's saying if you get involved with deviants and their deviant creeds, this is worse than being a Sunni Muslim who commits enormous sins. Because, like we said, that one who is a deviant and his deviance doesn't reach to the level of blasphemy, if he dies without repenting, he'll surely go to hell, but he won't stay there forever. He'll eventually be taken out, but for sure he'll go to hell. It's not like the Muslim who's an enormous sinner and he died without repenting, that he might be forgiven. So I hope that up to here, that part is clear about the rhetoric, yani, and the difference between our talk, the talk of Ahlus Sunnah, and the talk of the deviant groups. So to conclude, we want to mention that there's a difference between what the deviants say and the proofs that prove the truth. So what Ahlus Sunnah, what we use to confirm the truth, to confirm the creed of Islam, this is called evidence. It is called a proof because it leads you to the truth and it takes you to the truth. Just like let's say when you're on the highway, right? And you know that you got to get off on exit 41. So when you see the sign that says exit 41 and the lane that says exit 41, you know that's the exit that you got to take. So that if you want to get to where you're going, then you got to get off on exit 41. That's like the meaning of proof. And when we say a proof, I mean it's something that leads you to the truth. So like the verses of the Quran, like the confirmed hadith, and of course, and understanding them properly, that leads you to the truth. Or like for example, like the question that we asked. If you ask a Wahhabi, isn't it the case that the throne has a beginning? So if in this question, and it leads you to the truth because you have to say yes, because only Allah has no beginning. Everything is a creation except Allah. So he has to say that the throne has a beginning. And that will lead him to the truth, which is what? That Allah exists without a place. Because the throne has a beginning and Allah does not. So it'll lead him to the truth. Yani that Allah does not reside above the throne. That's not the creed of Islam. Uh, so that is a proof. That is evidence. Now, what the deviants, what they say, the things that they say, the rhetoric that they have, this is not called proof. This is called a fallacy. This is called something that does not lead to the truth. Um, so, for example, like when a Wahhabi said, when a Wahhabi quotes the verse, "Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa," they say, "Look, it says in this verse, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa," and then they'll say, "So that means that Allah is physically above the throne." So this is called a fallacy, right? This is called a fallacy. What does it mean, a fallacy? And it's something that does not lead you to the truth. Something that does not lead you to the truth. Something that leads you astray. Um, it leads to falsehood. So the one that uses it supposedly uh, to to make his point, he thinks that it's going to get him to the truth, but it's the cause of his misguidance. It's the cause of his misguidance. And so the deviant people, they've always used these strategies to try and distract the Muslims and to try to misguide the Muslims. And so, what's an example of that that's very clear? The devil himself, he did it. The devil himself, when he was ordered to prostrate to Adam and he refused, he mentioned a fallacy. He said, yani, and now, of course, this is an extreme case, right? Because it's the devil, and he's saying this, supposedly saying this to Allah. He said to Allah, "I am better than Adam because you created me from fire and you created him from clay." So that's called a fallacy. The devil thought that because he's created from fire, that makes him superior to Adam, and therefore it would be invalid for him, the devil, to prostrate to Adam because he thinks he's superior. Because the one who prostrates to another is the one that's inferior to the superior, the one who is lesser to the one who's better. And so the devil, he thought that he was better because he was made from fire. And so, because of that, it led him to believe that God is wrong for ordering him to prostrate to Adam. And that's why he blasphemed. Because he basically said, "Oh God, you are wrong. You're mistaken for ordering me to prostrate to Adam." All because of what? Because of his misunderstanding. He thought, because the devil thought that he's superior, automatically superior to Adam because he's made from fire. So that's called a fallacy. And we'll stop here for today. Um, are there any questions about anything? And I just wanted to mention the difference between proof and fallacy, because when you hear the people of misguidance, when you hear them say their fallacies, it should not shake you. You should remain steadfast and firm and strong because you know that you're on the truth. And we're going to mention in the next class, inshallah, more examples of fallacies that occurred, like what happened between Prophet Abraham alayhi salam and Nimrod. Nimrod thought that he had an argument. When Prophet Abraham alayhi salam, he called him to Islam, he told him, "You have to worship Allah." And then Nimrod said, and because Prophet Abraham alayhi salam, he said, "You have to worship Allah. Allah is the creator of life and death. He's the giver of life and death." And so Nimrod, he thought that he had an argument and he presented a fallacy. And he said, "Well, I am a giver of life and death. and he took an innocent man that was, and he just innocent man. He ordered for him to be executed, and he was executed. And he took a man that was sentenced to be executed, and he let him go, and he set him free. And Nimrod said, "Look, I give life and death." So this is called a fallacy. But then, of course, Prophet Abraham, alayhi salam, with rhetoric and with words, refuted him and silenced him. And he said, "My Lord is the one who brings the sun from the east. Let me see you bring it from the west." And he was silenced. And Nimrod was silenced. Why? Because he can't do anything about that. He can't control the sun in any way. And Nimrod claimed to be God. And he used to kill people who didn't worship him. So anybody that he encountered, he would order them to worship him, and if they didn't, he would kill them. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. So we'll talk about more about fallacies next class. Uh, and then inshallah we'll do a deep dive on those who attribute bodily attributes to Allah and Habis and those other groups. But these fundamentals are important to understand before getting into that because it's a very technical subject.